Hello, everyone. I hope all is well for you today. We're going to be taking a few minutes to talk about my most anticipated ships for Star Citizen in 2025 and just a few personal thoughts on them. After CitizenCon and all the hype behind base building, Space Stations 1.0, you can kind of tell that everything shifted a little bit more towards ships recently, with IEE being exactly a week away from now. I'm not going to be talking about many of the ships that are releasing within the next few weeks because they're releasing in the next few weeks and they're not coming in 2025. So this video is focused on ships that just aren't in the game yet and are going to be released in the next year or so. Outside of that, though, I wanted to a couple disclaimers is that I'm not super well informed on ships like component wise, damage output, just how they perform in maneuver. That is not my thing as much. I wish it was, but that's just a whole lot of information and um, don't really have the time for it, unfortunately. And secondly, this is just my personal opinion. I am judging these ships based off of the way they look, how I imagine them playing out in game, and just generally, being excited about new ships in this game because even though I don't buy anything in the pledge store, I love earning things through the in-game economy. I still love seeing what will be earnable, especially towards 1.0, whenever I really want to start earning and going and progressing towards ships. So, besides that, though, I really do want to just hear from you after you're done with this video. I would love if you would let me know what you are most excited for and why. Generally speaking, this isn't really a list based off of excitement. Just I've gathered a couple ships that I'm really excited for, and we're going to talk about them a little bit. So, let's get that started with number one, and that is going to be the weird looking Drake ship that we saw in the sort of slideshow at the very end of the Captains of Industry panel. We of course don't know that this is Drake because they haven't said anything about it. But I mean, I don't think there's much debate. It screams Drake just based off of the folded up wings and the kind of weird boxy shape that you kind of tend to see in Drake ships. There's absolutely nothing we know about the ship, but I really appreciate the fact that the design of the ship is more unique. Star Citizen ships are pretty different between each ship and manufacturer, but I would still really love to see more ships like this stray from the perfect spaceship look. The design of the ship almost seems a bit inconvenient. It has deceptively long wings and a very unique looking landing gear. Maybe we're just looking at it from a weird angle, but it does kind of look like the ship sits on one massive landing gear. I could imagine this being a smaller cargo hauler or maybe even just exploration. It doesn't really seem like it's going to be combat focused just due to its size and shape. Though we do see some visible weapons on the ship similar to the Corsair, it doesn't necessarily mean it's built for combat. Regardless of the ship's role, I think that the idea of this thing flying around the verse is going to be awesome. And generally speaking, especially with this whole Crusader Intrepid thing, I'm starting to love uglier ships just because we do have a lot of really good looking ships in this game, and I would love to mix it up and just have some not normal looking ships. So I think this one will fit in that category perfectly, and generally I just can't wait to see it. Second up, we have a ship that a lot of people know about, and that is the Apollo. Now, I know there's been a ton of hype around this ship for a long time, and though I wasn't really excited about it before, digging into some of the ship's details does grab my attention a whole lot more. And out of everything, the most interesting component of the ships has to be the drones that you get with it. These medical drones are designed to stabilize and retrieve players that are injured. And of course, that idea is awesome. But I think the biggest factor here is the fact that they are actually making a ship with drones. If they or go by their word that they said last year, they aren't really making ships without gameplay now. So hopefully, whenever the ship inevitably releases, it should have the drone implementation with it at release. So, fingers crossed for that. Back to the Apollo itself, though, I really do like the idea of more medical ships. The design by itself doesn't interest me too much, though everything the ship offers in terms of gameplay sounds awesome. This ship will arrive with 6 medical beds, making it easily one of the most significant medical ships we have received so far. The ship is seemingly designed for retrieving players in the middle of combat and should move pretty quickly. Overall, I think that we're going to be seeing this ship in a ton of fleets. Generally speaking, the drone component of this ship is probably the best part about it, and I think that's going to make it a staple of medical gameplay. So far, the Cutlass Red, the C8 Pisces, the medical version, those ships are wonderful, and I'm glad that we have those. But the Apollo really looks like it's designed for medical gameplay, like, not just medical beds slapped inside of the outline of another ship. It really seems like it's designed for that gameplay. So I wouldn't expect to see this ship too soon, just due to the fact that the drone implementation will probably come alongside of base building with its drones, and then of course this ship with its drones. They'll probably line up pretty similarly with the timeline wise. Besides that, though, I think it's a great ship. I think it's going to do so much for medical gameplay. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of the design, I am in love with the gameplay and just the drone aspect of the ship. Next up, though, we have the Starlancer Tac. This ship has to be one of the most exciting ones for me personally, and it really seems like a unit of firepower designed to withstand a ton of hits and put out a ton of damage. Design wise, the ship is very rounded, yet stays buff and aggressive. For some reason, the ship gives me some kind of AC 130 vibes with the side turrets on both sides, with the ability to deploy a Fury snub fighter and drop seats with Gatlings attached to the doors. This ship can really do it all combat wise. You can expect about a 6 player crew to be a decent average for this ship, but honestly, based off of what I saw in the interior, it kind of seems like you might need a little bit more due to the drop seats and numerous gunner seats. We know that the TAC will be pretty slow mover based off of what we've seen in the PTU with the Starlancer Max, though I do think that it makes up for that in firepower and just greater armor overall. The TAC suffers from a small blind spot towards the back of the ship, at least turret wise. I know there's a remote missile launcher, I believe, but I think for overall balancing purpose, it isn't a really big deal. Besides that, though, I think that we see the ship in the next few months. They clearly already have the exterior built out extensively just due to the fact that the Starlancer Max is in game. And then the interior will probably take a bit of time, but I can't imagine it's going to take absolutely, forever. Besides that, though, just super excited. After that, we're taking a little bit of a turn with the new supposed salvage ship. Now, of course, we don't absolutely know for sure that this is a salvage ship, but based off the outline, it very much resembles a salvage head at the end of the ship. At first glance, it really just looks like a prospector turned salvage, and arguably it is almost guaranteed to be a MISK ship. Though I will say that the hard right angles and part of the ship doesn't really scream MISK as much as I thought it would. Besides the shape and look of the ship, though, I think that having a medium-sized salvager again is a little weird, but still very nice for the salvager game loop. Um, I do think that with only having the reclaimer and vulture, two very polar opposites when it comes to size, and then adding another ship that's practically the same size as the Vulture might be a little weird. But besides that, I mean, it doesn't really matter that much because in the end, whenever we get 1.0, we should have numerous salvage ships varying in size. So I'm honestly not very bothered by that. I'm super excited to see how this ship might differ from the Vulture and see if it has some advantages or cons compared to it. Besides that, though, I could imagine that we see the ship entering the PTU this year. I don't think it'll take too long to make, as it is pretty small. And since they seem to be working on more MISK ships lately, they should have a decent bit of assets built up for making the ship look pretty nice. So outside of that, though, I'm excited for it regardless. And a new salvage ship sounds amazing. Next up, we're talking about a completely different ship and one that I think a lot of people are the most hyped about, and that is the Perseus. Visually, this ship is everything I've wanted from a combat ship. In my opinion, it looks like a modern day warship shaped into a spaceship, and I absolutely dig it. Alongside the typical RSI triangular shape, the ship features a massive size 7 gun at the front and extremely aggressive and intimidating look. I also do believe that there is a size 7 on the bottom back end of the ship, just not as easy to see. Realistically, though, I could see this ship sitting next to a javelin and being super useful in those instance fleet battles that we're going to get in the future. This ship definitely seems like it would be the first line of attack in these battles. Its greatest advantage, in my opinion, has to be the large but subcapital size. Though the ship is by all means very large, it manages to be much smaller than your typical like full-size capital ship, but also extremely powerful and deadly. I could see the Perseus shredding hammerheads and dealing massive amounts of damage to larger capital class ships. The introduction of the Polaris into Star Citizen is a great shift in momentum for RSI ships. Knowing that many of those assets that are pulled from the Polaris are going to be used for the Perseus means that we might see the ship a little bit sooner than later. As much as I would love to believe that, I'm going to keep my expectations in check and just assume that we're going to see the ship just like the Polaris at IAE next year. I hope, of course, we get it before then, but you got to keep your expectations in check with this game, or else you are going to be massively disappointed. Besides that, though, I think the Perseus looks amazing. Visually speaking, probably one of my favorite ships on this whole list I'm making. And then combat wise, I think it's just gonna shred. So it's gonna be very exciting to see this thing in game, and I can't wait to make and earn one of these things. The next ship is quite literally the gateway to in-game content in Star Citizen when 1.0 hits, and that would be the Pioneer. As we all know, the Pioneer had some slight changes at CitizenCon this year, and I am all here for it. Although the original concept is awesome in theory, the new design without the extended arm and the openable top does a whole lot more in terms of being a mobile base. I personally like the redesign much more than the concept for the overall functionality of base building. Feeding larger drones sounds like a much more realistic approach to base building than what we were considering before in the past. In my opinion, when I saw the shipping concept just a few months ago, I thought about how insane it was to think that we would be actually building like a base or outpost or whatnot, and then placing it on a plot of land or whatever with this ship. And even though, like in theory, in my head that sounds cool, I know not only would it be tedious, but it's just unrealistic for a game like Star Citizen. So I'm super glad that they went with the more drone route when it comes to this. The Pioneer by itself, though, besides all that, it can not only create small ships, it can craft small and large craftables, refine and collect resources, hold up to 1,000 SCU of cargo, and of course has an onboard medical facility. The ship not only creates bases, but acts as one too. This will be the first time we ever see the ability to collect resources from your landing gear passively. And I think it is a great idea overall just for collecting resources in this massive ship. I think the Pioneer is going to be a staple of every org. Being the biggest base builder and the literal requirement for space stations, you are bound to see these things often. I know the ship is going to take a ton of time to buy in game, especially towards 1.0, but I do think that'll be a really, really awesome goal for a lot of players, including myself. I would expect to see this in game, maybe late 2025 or early 2026. Realistically speaking, I would give yourself a 2-year window from the point that they talked about it at CitizenCon, which did mark roughly when they started development on it. Just so you kind of have realistic expectations for when it'll come. They did mention how it won't arrive with base building when that first comes into the game, so you can automatically assume that like it's gonna be a little bit of time. But I do think that the overall vision of this ship makes me super excited for it and makes the wait for it a lot more worth it in the end. Now, moving on to my most anticipated ship of 2025, and that is the Ironclad. Whether this is the assault variant or the cargo variant, I'm not too sure. It's probably going to be the cargo variant as they usually release that first. Overall, though, I'm a huge fan of the way this ship looks with the boxy look going on, as well as the 6 massive thrusters in the back. And then you top that off with the Drake aesthetic overall. This ship looks incredible. It looks rugged and it looks just like a massive beast. And I dig it so much. The Ironclad is going to feature a massive front ramp and a roof that opens for easy access to the cargo hold. Similar to the Caterpillar, it's going to have a command module that will act as the cruise escape pod if needed. The ship will have a ton of storage for cargo and even a small cargo hold in the back of the ship intended for high priority resources. I believe this area can be locked off so that pirates and whatnot have a harder time accessing it. That'll be specific to the cargo variant, and then the assault variant will have a repair bay that replaces that area for your ground vehicles that get damaged in combat. Overall, though, I'm excited for both of these variants, though the assault variant is easily what gets me the most excited just due to the fact that I'm more combat oriented. My ideal situation to have an Ironclad assault has to easily be base rating. The ship by itself doesn't seem like it has a ton for ship to ship combat, and it really shouldn't because it is such a massive ship. But it does have some decent defenses for it whenever it's in the air, and more specifically when it gets on the ground. When it gets on the ground, that's whenever everything changes, in my opinion. This ship can hold a ton of tanks. Of course, you can see in the concept art, it holds a ton of tanks in it. And then if you decide to change that ground vehicle to something else, something smaller, you can fit a massive amount of not only players but ground vehicles in this thing. So ideally, I can just imagine one of these things get like a kilometer or half a kilometer out from a base, landing, deploying a ton of ground vehicles and players and whatnot, and just absolutely going at a location. I don't really anticipate this thing flying around much in these very combat heavy situations, but I do think that it'll play a very, very important role in gaining more access to some of these bases that you're trying to raid. So of course, this is all just me speculating and having fun with the idea that you could assault bases with these things. And of course, I don't think we're going to get the assault variant for a while, at least. But when we do, I do think that it'll be an incredible base raider and overall an awesome ship to have in the game. Besides that, though, that kind of wraps up my most anticipated ships for 2025. I know I left a few out of there because I don't know them all, and there's gonna be a ton more ships in 2025 that they just haven't talked about that will release at some point in the future. But besides that, though, remember that this is a completely opinion-based video. Um, I could be completely wrong about some of these ships, and generally speaking, some of them could be terrible. Like, of course, I don't want the Ironclad to be terrible, but there is a chance that it releases and it is just the worst base raider known to man, and everything I just said means nothing. But then again, that's the fun in just being speculative and talking about the things that excite you. So I appreciate you being here. This is kind of a more random video for me. I just kind of wanted to have some fun with the upcoming ships this next year. Besides that, though, I have a few more videos on my channel about Star Citizen, and I have a Star Citizen playlist if you want to go through that a little bit. Besides that, though, I really do appreciate you being here. Any support is also appreciated. If you'd like to like and subscribe, feel free to do so. Dislike if you didn't like the video. And overall, out of anything, I would love to hear from you and just what your most anticipated ships of this upcoming year are. Out of all the things, I just love hearing about other people's opinions and generally how they feel about some of the things coming to Star Citizen. So, besides that, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.